This episode is brought to you by Salesforce. Stay tuned to the end to hear from Kevin Doyle, Regional Vice President of Agentforce and Data Cloud at Salesforce, about the immense interest in Agentic AI and use case opportunities for Australian organisations. Hello and welcome to the iTnews podcast. Our first guest this fortnight is Prospa's Head of Data and Analytics, Jin Foo. An online lender for small business, Prospa has used hackathons and graph database technology to map out complex relationships between directors and entities applying for loans. It's also already experimenting with Agentic AI as a way to automatically assess and flag issues in large amounts of documentation that often accompany a loan application. Maybe a good place to start is just talking a little bit about yourself as the head of data and analytics. Were you the first holder of that role at Prospa?
Yes, before I came along, we had senior engineering managers looking after data. I was brought in to help set up a data science team. It started with just me. Maybe after 3 years, I hired a team of about 4 or 5. Part of this team is full-time. The other half is part-time, where we have a very good collaboration with Macquarie Uni, and we have PhD candidates that essentially work at Prosper while doing their PhD at Macquarie. During these 3 years, I went from a lead scientist to a staff engineer or staff data scientist, and eventually was asked to head the team. At that point, I think the transformation was we originally were just connecting data and bringing data together for other people to use. But during those 3 years, I think what changed is that more and more the business realized that this data isn't just about reporting, it's actually an asset. We could use it to understand our customers, understand what they want, or perhaps what their profile is and what's the right product for them. Essentially, at some stage, I think data itself became the product. It's a monetizable thing. It's very valuable. And there was a shift from just collecting or collating data to actually thinking, what can we do with it? That is basically the remit for my role. I spend maybe half my time doing a bit of data strategy, ideation, and how could this help the product. I sit down with operations team members, product leaders, and try to understand where the market is going. Maybe payday loans are the next big thing, or buy now, pay later was huge a while ago. It's a very interesting space. The other half of the time, I'm building technical prototypes, so models, pipelines, because we're not that big, so everyone gets to really participate. There's no just watching from the sidelines.
Before there was this centralized data science function, were there pockets of the organization where some of these activities were already taking place in terms of thinking about data as a product, as a monetizable asset? Or was this really started when the centralized function took shape?
That's a great question. From my own observation, I could see that, yes, there were little pockets where people were trying to make something more than just reports or just predict what will happen next. We do credit loans, and naturally, one of the most important things is to figure out if a customer is risky or perhaps might default or do something very dodgy. But I think that was the very first thing different teams tried to understand. Like, if I had information about a person or their company, could we tell that this was a good customer or not? I think my role here was more providing perhaps a high-level guidance on what sort of data was available, because when teams are siloed, I think it's very hard to know what else is out there because you have access to your systems, but not someone else's. Without that oversight or overview, it's very hard to share information. You can only see what you see, and that's very limited. So perhaps the first thing I did was try to share information between operational and the credit risk teams. And this way, suddenly they both had access to more knowledge from both sides. I think that was the very first baby step that we did. I come from mining and construction and retail, FMCG, so it was a learning experience for me to understand the basic principles of a loan product. And ultimately, I guess a product is a product. There is a price, there is a margin, there are costs associated with it. But there's a lot of very subtle nuances I have realized that loan or credit products, they depend so much on the segment of the market that you are going for. And each segment has very specific needs or attributes, and you can tweak the product for different rates, different loan terms, different compliance requirements. So it's quite unique, although it's only one product, but because you can adjust all these attributes, you actually can really customize it for a business.
There's obviously, and maybe this predates a bit in terms of you coming into the finance industry, but there's a lot of movement around digitization of loan origination these days, particularly aimed at shortening the time to decision. You've talked a
Yes.
little bit about this so far, but I imagine Prospa wasn't immune from this. But was it one of the drivers that set you down the path of rethinking how to restructure loan related data? Or were there other factors that were driving you down this direction?
I would say that today, now, time to decision is the most important priority. Back then, though, 3 or 4 years ago, perhaps it was more around risk and managing things like payments to unknown parties or terrorist parties, things like that, getting ready for the data regulations that were coming out of Europe, and just trying to understand, like, even a simple one where someone can ask, can I delete all my information related to me? We realized wasn't that simple to do. So I would say initially it was very much more of an exploration. But when we saw how effective it was at understanding a customer or predicting whether they would convert or churn or take another product, that's probably when we realized that, oh, this might help with time to yes. So it was a bit of a journey. And I would say time to yes is always at the top of everyone's mind, as what you said. But perhaps it was only then that we started to really go, oh, this actually helps move the dial by really clearly separating very good, very bad customers. We can simplify the process a lot, not just small margins, but actually make a meaningful difference. That's probably when people got more excited. And for me, when I learned that this is very important.
One of the things you've talked about so far is joining internal data sets and internal data silos together to understand more about relationships between customer entities in the
Yes.
loans application process. I imagine there would be external data sets that would
Mhm.
also be important to that. And maybe this sort of starts to go into one of the topics that we're talking a little bit about today, which is around how you structure the data so that you can map out some of those relationships and understand relationships more easily and more quickly. Do you want to just talk a little bit about the data sources that are
Mhm.
important to this process as a starting point, but then how you started to look differently at the way that you map out the
Yeah.
relationships between different data points?
Yeah, maybe 3 or 4 broad categories. So naturally, the very first one is the CRM or the customer relationship management software that would just have all the customer and product attributes. Then we have third-party checks like credit checks, things like transaction analysis. You have all the normal players like Equifax and Alien providing these services. I would say standard practice where someone asks for a loan or maybe applies for a new job, they run simple credit check and we take that information. I think most of the time it's things like companies that they've been directors of, other positions they might hold, and there's a little bit more we pull from the Australian Business Register. So this is actually available to anyone who's willing to pay $20 for one query, and it's more or less public information that can be purchased. I think generally the idea is to understand, have these companies been in default? Have they been involved in anything illegal? That's the main thing. Where it gets interesting is that Prosper deals primarily with businesses, and for an entrepreneur, they often have more than one business. Very few businesses succeed right at the first go, I suppose. So someone who's out there to make a living might have 2 or 3 successful businesses running. They might have 2 or 3 others that they've decided to sell, but the business landscape, I would say, can be quite complex. And what I mean by that is you have directors with more than one company or companies with more than one director. When you put that together and try to put it in a nice table, whether it's SQL or Excel, suddenly it gets really hard. Actually, now you've reminded me, the first problem I was asked to solve was, can we find the duplicated businesses and customers? Because legally, every business is a separate entity. So when you apply for a loan, that's attached to the legal business, which is correct. But one person could also have, say, 10 businesses, each one with a loan. And the question then becomes, is that okay? It's a very interesting question, but not easy to answer. We had very complex SQL queries that would try to account for every possible combination of person and business. It gets very complicated very fast, and I looked at it and I thought, this is too hard. I don't think I could maintain this. So that's where I think I thought, okay, what if we thought about it differently? So not tables, but more like relationships. Person A has company one, two, three. Company two might have person B as a co-director. But when you start to map it out visually, it becomes a lot more intuitive for the business when they consider risk. It's not just the direct risk, but also indirect connections. So if you had a shareholder who was a silent shareholder on a lot of companies that somehow are going broke or just not paying money back, you start to wonder that, that's interesting. Every director that asks for a loan is different. However, every single one of those companies have one silent shareholder that is the same person. So this is an example of what I managed to find, I think, that helped justify that it was worth digging into a bit more. That's the internal, external. I think the third category of data is probably unstructured data, things like transcripts, comments, things that are difficult to put a flag, yes and no. It's information like customer is young, has a family, has run successful businesses previously. So it's just notes like that, which are, I think, important in context, but very difficult to put into a table and say, is that good or bad? It's not clear. It's roughly the three groups of data that we've been trying to connect together.
You touched on the origins of graph database technology into the organization just there in the second point, I think.
Yes.
But do you want to just talk a little bit about that journey from relational to graph database and how you went about experimenting and then productionizing it?
This was definitely difficult. I came from Woolies, so I had been working a lot with graph networks, particularly during the COVID years, and trying to make sure that all the key warehouses had enough pasta and toilet paper was not easy, because if someone got sick, it meant that one center or one store could be out of the network, and therefore does that affect the rest of the network? So I did spend a lot of time looking at graphs there. Because it was fresh in my mind, I thought, could I represent these relationships in terms of a graph? So after a bit of research, I came across the Panama Papers case. It's a very interesting story, and it's become a whole Netflix movie as well. That gave me some inspiration, and I realized that it is definitely doable. In fact, it seems to be what graphs are designed to do, which is to identify a lot of different relationships. I tested this data that we had, and this is where I think the collaboration with Macquarie Uni was very valuable, in that because they had so much knowledge around graph networks, I could ask and test out ideas very quickly. So within a few weeks, we went through at least 5 or 6 versions of a customer-based graph. We were trying to figure out, is a customer a node? That has led us to ask the business, what is a customer? Is it the person? Is it the entity? Is it that combination? We realized that we've never really thought about how to define these things. And it's actually really, really important, because we start to understand that different parts of the business saw a customer quite differently. As part of this process, we've had helped to define legal entities, customers, groups. It has been very helpful in having useful conversations. Where it really came together, I think, was we did this in a hackathon. I tried to connect just random bits of that information from the CRM and the third-party data, and just somehow managed to find an example of a customer who had maybe 30 different loans and maybe 15 different companies, all with us. But we had not noticed that they had so many. So the business realized there were multiple, but I think it was difficult to see all of them. So we could only track a few of the common companies, because a few of them had the same person as a secondary director, not the primary one. So it's not obvious immediately. I think the technical term is the non-beneficiary shareholder. It's not obvious. And I would say that was where everyone had that penny drop moment, and when that is very interesting. We went a lot faster after that when we start to notice that this coincided with the time when interest rates went from 0 to something. So there was a lot more pressure then as well, I think, on businesses. once interest rates started climbing, we became more aware, I would say, of the potential for distress.
If you've got 15 entities all with loans,
Yes.
the one organization, it's just risk. If one or two of them go belly up, can they service the other 13?
Exactly. So these are simply good customers who had been doing fine up until now, but things have obviously changed a lot. We have actually used these to alert customers of potential distress. In some cases, they have actually been very grateful that we highlighted their potential, even tax payments or tax liabilities that could impact them. We would say, no, we can't give you the loan. The reason is that we noticed that you may have a very large liability coming right up. One of them, I remember, actually came back and thanked us and said, we didn't know this either. So they were very happy, actually. So this rare, I think, to say no and have a happy customer. But I thought, oh, we've at least made a positive difference to them.
And what did you actually choose for the database technology? When did you go about implementing it?
Right at the start, we tested a whole series of different network graphs. Network X was one I used at Woolies, and we tried that. We tested Neo4j, which is available open source, so very easy to just pick up and use. I think the difference for us was the ease of use and perhaps the visual friendliness of Neo4j, where it was very easy for me to present back to the business, to senior leaders, to technical developers, the same thing. I didn't have to create 3 versions. I could show all of them the same thing and they understood what it was. And I think that helped take it over the line because it's new, definitely untested in our org. And I would say it is a critical business service, finding anomalies, identifying customers. I'm grateful to the senior leadership for really giving myself and the team a chance to test it out, to try it. We ran the open source version for about a year. And the reasoning that I gave the business was it's open source. There is no risk that the company will decide to stop making the software. We would still run it locally. So it was all set up on local virtual machines. And the other argument I had was if we needed to scale up, we can then buy the full version. We hit that point after a year where there was enough information in there that was quite big. We were hitting the graph constantly to check customers, to deduplicate them. That's when I say the cost of buying the full version is the same as us running it on our machines now. When we switched to the full paid version, all I had to do was back up our database, transfer it across. Everything was the same. And it was such a relief, I think, for me, because running on virtual machines meant that I am the one who did all these things. That's a huge benefit, I would say. Now we have multiple redundancies in the cloud system that Neo4j provides. It has hot backup, so if someone accidentally destroyed the identity graph, no problem. It's backed up every hour. It's no issue at all.
One of the things you mentioned earlier in the conversation was that when you were doing this in more of a tabular format, you were running very complex SQL queries over the data to try and cover every permutation and different kind of pattern. One of the things I understand is that you're using potentially, I think, Copilot in association with the graphs to be able to query some of them in natural language. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing there? I'm assuming this is for the business users.
Earlier, when I mentioned the 3 groups of data, the CRM stuff, the third-party stuff, and the unstructured stuff, so far we've done reasonably well with the first 2, connecting the customers and their third-party information. Now, during this time, everyone knows about Copilot now. It's become huge. But in this time, one of the reasonings we had for going with a graph was that eventually I wanted to create vectorized representations of that third group of data, which is the sentences and text and emails from customers. By vectorizing that, which basically means we convert all that into sets of numbers that the computer can then cluster together or categorize and match, we could then use that. And one of the most effective vector databases is basically a graph. And because now we have the customer identity and more or less the risk profile, we could then add all that unstructured sentiment information to the identity graph. So now we will have a knowledge graph of the customer, which essentially represents what we know about them. When this is set up, The beauty of it is that we can point advanced tools like Office 365 and Copilot at that graph. And it's the missing link, I think, that layer. So I've been to a couple of very good discussions with Databricks and Microsoft. And from all these discussions, I call this the data intelligence layer. So most of the time you have the raw data, then what most people know as a medallion architecture. So bronze data, silver, and then gold data. The difference is bronze data is just raw. Silver data may have been connected. So all the different tables have now been joined. And then finally in the gold layer, all the metrics and calculations are done. So you go from having raw source data between different systems to connected source data to numbers like conversion numbers, margins, and so on. Most of the time, people then point the final front end interface on that Go layer. So you could use Excel with Copilot or Power BI with Copilot or something on that Go layer. Where I think the magic happens is the data intelligence layer that we are focusing on between the Go and whatever else is out there. Because what this layer has is the identity graph. It has all that connected vectorized information. It also has things like conversion models, churn models, all the data science models in my first year that we were building, the very traditional machine learning classification models. We put all that in the data intelligence layer. So now you don't just have metrics and calculations, you have things like customer segment, customer preference. Are they going to churn? Are they going to convert? What is their lifetime value looking like? Then when we point Copilot at that very context-rich information, you get far better results than just pointing Copilot at the Go tables, which works okay. But I think to get the maximum benefit from something like Copilot, you need to provide it a lot of context. So now the user can ask in, say, Power BI or Excel, which we connected and are testing, you can ask something like, show me customers who may be in arrears, but we have not called them in the last 30 days or something. We did this live during another hackathon. So you can see my strategy here. Everything I want to try, just try at the hackathon to get the buy-in that I need, because I need to show business value. I need to build a business case. And if I can build enough excitement at a hackathon, that definitely helps a lot. So we did it live, asking that question, and it actually worked. We only set it up half an hour before the hackathon. So it's incredible. It provided a list of customers who we have not called, who are in arrears. I think at that point, people start to realize this is really powerful, because normally you'd have to make a request. Someone would probably spend a couple hours trying to figure out that data. That's assuming they know where everything is and everything is there. But by really preparing high quality context rich data, suddenly the dream of self-service analytics becomes more real, I think. It has never worked, I would say. Self-service analytics is difficult because you don't know what to ask. I myself can't predict what data is required, but by creating such context, suddenly it becomes so accessible. For the average business user, you don't have to wait to create a ticket and wait for your request to be looked at. You can now more or less converse with Copilot to just ask a lot of things, and that removes a lot of what we call high friction or low value interactions, where it's like, hey, I need this column, let's build it in a couple hours. Oh, maybe it's not that column, maybe it's another one. And then this goes back and forth for a few days before people work out, oh, that's what I really need. So I think that removes that very high friction interaction, makes everyone a lot happier.
Maybe you're looking at this, or even maybe you're not, but it feels like some of that friction around self-service analytics is trying to be addressed through what came out at the end of 2024 around Agentic AI particularly.
Yes.
And that's really sort of flowing into 2025 in a big way. This idea of having AI agents be able to handle some of this more sophisticated query work. Do you see potential applications for that technology in your line of work, or is it stuff that's already overlapping with what you're doing with Copilot and Power BI?
Last year, we did a team session where the entire data and analytics team spent maybe half a day doing a strategy session internally. Then we spent the next day at the Microsoft event that was at the ICC late last year. We were quite blown away by the whole demonstration of the live agent answering questions, creating pictures, speaking in Mandarin when asked to. We were just like, wow. And the next day we considered how would we use this? We had the benefit of solutions engineers from Azure and Neo4j joining us. I'm very happy that they sit down with us for a whole day to essentially guide us through using all these new agentic workflows. During the short session, which only like 3 hours, one of the team members did build a assessment agent, I suppose. Very basic, but it's more like a proof of concept. And it combined the use of traditional logistic regression models, but with all the context from our graph, so that for an agent, they could then ask a lot of questions rather than going through a lot of documents. So rather than reviewing pages of documents, they could ask things about their past financial history, about any specific attributes, and so on. I think what we realize is the more rules we add for the agent, we can probably set it all up to happen automatically. So I am not sure if that is coming soon or not, but I would say conceptually it does work. And for me, the moment where I was very happy was when the solutions engineer said to us that it works really well if you have a vector database. And the team were like, oh, not sure if we could build one in time. So that's when our Neo4j engineer could speak up and say, no, you do have one. It's right here. You have a very rich one, actually. And I think the team were very excited. That's when I felt happy because for me, that was the moment when people really understood why we had gone to all this trouble to set up this graph database. It seemed like a lot of work, difficult to tie that back to value. So at that moment, I was like, see, I told you. I've been telling you for the last couple of years. So yes, very satisfying, I think.
I've come through the questions I had. Is there anything that you would like to get across that you think I missed?
Only thing I would add perhaps is being in the finance industry, regulations and compliance is very, very strict. So we probably move slowly, I think, because we're being very careful to make sure these things make sense. With all the experiments that we do, the approach we've gone here really is to empower users. AI and graphs and machine learning, they are tools. I am old enough to have used logbooks at school, so I do recall when the year after me was allowed to use calculators, and I thought that was very unfair. But I realized that these tools help you do the math, but you still have to understand how to do it. So for me, AI and graphs really unlock scale and quality. That example with agents is a good one where AI is particularly good and graph vectors are supporting agent in this. They're really good at parsing documents, interpreting a lot of documents. So rather than spending half an hour trying to read through all of a customer's legal documents, we can now just feed it through, summarize it, teach the algorithm to call out anything we want to, like defaults or things like that. Now, that person can contribute their wisdom and experience to make that decision, yes or no. It's more of a human in the loop approach, I think, that makes sense rather than trying to replace functionality. So instead of dealing with one customer per half an hour, we can now work with many, many more and add value in a more meaningful way, I think, rather than just reading documents and stuff like that. I think it's always important to remember it is just a tool, very powerful one, very impressive, and still requires our judgment to apply. It's very exciting times.
I'm Nate Cochran, contributing editor with iTnews, and I'm here with Kevin Doyle, Regional Vice President of Agentforce and Data Cloud at Salesforce. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Kevin, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Salesforce.
I left uni and I did 10 years in advertising agencies, which was very much about how do we help connect a brand with their customer. And then I heard about a company called Salesforce, who that's their bread and butter. And I've been at Salesforce now for 12 years. Now I've had many different roles really focused around customer experience. And that's really come to where I'm heading up Agentforce and Data Cloud. Agentforce being our latest AI solution that is really responding very well to customer demands.
Now, I understand that you've just finished hosting Agentforce World Tour in Sydney. How was that experience?
We had 10,000 join us there, sharing hundreds of stories of how organizations across Australia and New Zealand are transforming their business. We only launched Agentforce, which is our agentic AI layer, globally in October last year, locally in November. And already we've got thousands of customers live and using it and transforming the way that they do their work and engage with their customers.
For those who are new to the concept, what is agentic AI and how is it different to some of the other platforms that people may already be familiar with using?
We talk to organizations of all size, small, medium, large. They all have got the same types of challenges and problems around NPS and customer metrics and retention of key talent, increasing revenue, decreasing costs, increasing productivity. And in Australia, it's been hard to make meaningful impacts in those metrics, really since COVID. Gen AI came around, which was the second wave of AI with the launch of ChatGPT, and organizations across the country jumped for joy because finally they could start to tackle some of the big problems that they have in their organizations. Fast forward though, unfortunately, Nate, it hasn't worked. Organizations around the country who have tried to DIY their AI and it's failed. All they have to show for it is a large expense bill and a roadmap, which sounds promising, but it hasn't been able to take the benefits of Gen AI and deliver it to their enterprise. The third layer of AI is agentic AI. And that is how do we have trusted, grounded AI that's based on the data of the organization, not only just assisting like a co-pilot, but actually taking action. So if you think about an organization that you engage with, maybe an airline, if you want to call up and make a change to a flight, you're waiting for 45 minutes just to talk to a human who's going to charge you $79 to change your flight. An agent will be able to do that for you. And so that next layer of transformation, we're seeing huge productivity unlocks where organizations across Australia and New Zealand, they're thinking about how do I save 9 figures of cost out of my business? How do I make every employee more productive? And how do I help every one of my customers have a much better experience with my organization?
So, Kevin, what's behind Australian executives and business owners' interest in agentic AI? Is there something further behind their interest in adding agentic AI systems to their businesses?
So helping their employees work more effectively and delighting their customers absolutely is critically important. But what's been really interesting to me is the role of the CEO in these conversations. Now, every CEO that I talk to, and in fact, any annual report that you've read over the last 24 months, the one thing that is the top of every laundry list of wishes and desires is how can you help me with productivity in my organization? If you think about the average organization, they have an inelastic workforce. And every CEO has got multiple ideas about how they want to grow their business and help their customers be more successful. However, they have constraints. The promise of agentic AI is, well, what if your business had no limits?
So I understand you've done some research into Australian businesses' appetite and readiness for AI. What were the quick takeaways from that?
This was really surprising to us because we found the C-suite think that agents will be critical to their success, and 79% have AI as a top priority. The fact that AI now has that seat at the table and they see the potential of what a digital workforce working alongside their human workforce could be, that's been a very interesting paradigm shift in Australia and one that we don't think is going to go away.
How much technical knowledge do you need to stand up one of these agentic AI systems from Salesforce?
This is clicks, not code. And this is the secret to agents, but also Agentforce from Salesforce. What we've seen is that DIYing your AI does not work. You are attempting to hire, if you can find them, dozens and hundreds of data scientists and engineers to try to patch something together. And after 2.5 years, most Australian organizations who have been on that journey have no more to show for it than an expensive roadmap that isn't yet delivered. Because Agentforce is built on the Salesforce platform, we're able to get all of the deeply unified data that already exists in Salesforce and already exists in your organization. And we're able to give agents access to that so we can actually make impact really, really fast at a really, really high level.
Just on that notion of data, what are the Salesforce data technologies that are underpinning some of these projects in Australia?
Nate, the number one fastest selling organic product we've ever had at Salesforce is Data Cloud. Data Cloud frees up the trapped data that organizations have across their business, be it in AWS or Databricks or Snowflake or custom industry solutions. And we bring all of that data into a single place. And once it's in Data Cloud, it's then available for every cloud in Salesforce. It's also available for every agent in Salesforce. And so that means that organizations can move fast in a really cost-effective manner in order to get all of that data, expose it to agents, where those agents can take action. That's an absolute game changer.
Indeed, I understand that healthcare provider Pacific Smiles is a user of Data Cloud, and they've been able to use the agentic system with their Salesforce customer data to generate more positive oral health outcomes for their patients. Can you tell us a little bit about that implementation?
So Pacific Smiles, they treat over 1 million smiles every year, and they want every experience with a dentist to be as successful as absolutely possible. Now, of course, the constraint that they had in their business was as simple as someone trying to call up and book an appointment, someone going on their website in order to actually find when can I see a dentist that will meet me. What they've been able to achieve is an estimated 80% reduction in booking times. So that means you're taking out the number one friction point of a customer doing business with you. And that's fundamental, because as soon as we remove that friction point, we're now going to increase the productivity and the capacity of every dentist and every dental clinic.
And a lot of very happy, smiling patients as well walking the streets of Australia. So for organizations that are keen to get started on their agentic AI journey, what are the first steps they need to take?
So if you're an IT professional and you've been working to get all of your data and all those trapped silos of data, now all of that data is ready to be brought in to agents. Instead of having to train an LLM and worry about every time data shifts, we need to retrain an LLM. Is it secure? Is it safe? Now you can get an agent out of the box working on that. If you don't have your data sorted, we just start with what is the use case that will add the most value with the easiest to access data, and we start there. And we get one agent live and we make sure that it works, and then we drive an amazing outcome on the back of it.
How do our listeners engage with Salesforce? How do they get a hold of the technology and start implementing it within their own businesses?
They can jump on the Salesforce website, salesforce.com, and they can get in touch with us there.
Thank you so much, Kevin Doyle from Salesforce, for joining us and walking us through the exciting field of agentic AI. It certainly looks like the labour force and the workplace of Australia's future is going to look a little bit different to what we've been used to. Thank you once again, and thank you for joining us.
That's the episode for this fortnight. Stay tuned for the next episode. And for all the latest headlines and happenings in Australian technology news, head over to itnews.com.au.